Sweet in its season. Chapter 1. The Boil-Over. 62 people were watching Annie Bergstrom exaggerate about her great-grandfather, and she was enjoying every minute of it. Now, Gustav Bergstrom came over from Sweden in 1921 with $11, a cast-iron kettle, and absolutely no idea what he was doing. She called out over the crackle of the fire, which, if you ask my brother, makes him the founder of a proud family tradition. Laughter rolled around the circle of folding chairs. The evening crowd was ringed up on the lawn between the restaurant and the water. Families from Illinois in matching windbreakers, a tour bus from Milwaukee, 2 honeymooners who'd been holding hands since the salads. Beyond them, the harbor at Fish Creek lay flat and gold in the 7 o'clock light, sailboat masts swaying like a congregation that couldn't quite agree on the hymn. Annie stood beside the fire in her white apron, tongs in hand, doing what she had done nearly every summer evening of her adult life. The kettle hung over the flames, big as a wash barrel, and inside it, 40 pounds of Lake Michigan whitefish waited in a rolling salt boil with red potatoes and small onions. "Here's what you need to know about a Door County fish boil," she said. "It is not a recipe, it is an event. The Scandinavians who settled this peninsula needed to feed their lumber crews and fishing crews fast and cheap, and this was the answer. Fish, potatoes, onions, salt. That's it. People ask me what seasoning we use." She let the question hang. Salt, and then, for depth of flavor, more salt. "How do you know when it's done?" A man near the front called out. "Excellent question, sir, and the answer is standing right over there." Annie pointed her tongs at her brother. "That gentleman by the woodpile is Carl. Carl is our boil master, which means for 20 years he has held the most dangerous job in the restaurant and the fewest speaking lines." Carl raised one hand in acknowledgement, without changing expression. He was built like their father, wide through the shoulders, and he wore his fireproof gloves the way other men wore a wedding band, so habitually you stopped seeing them. "When the fish is perfect," Annie went on, "the fish oils have risen to the top of the kettle, and we do not want them, so we get rid of them the traditional way. Carl?" Carl picked up the small pail of kerosene. "Folks in the front row," Annie said pleasantly, "you signed the waiver with your dinner reservation." Nervous laughter. Phones came up all around the circle. Carl flung the kerosene at the base of the fire, and the flames leapt up around the kettle in a 10-foot roar of orange, and the pot boiled violently over the rim, oils and foam hissing down into the fire, and just as fast it was finished, the flames settling, the crowd bursting into applause the way crowds had at this exact spot since 1963. "That," Annie announced, "is a boil-over. Dinner is served. And save room, because there is Door County cherry pie waiting inside, and I will personally be offended if you skip it." She held the smile while the crowd streamed toward the dining room, and it wasn't hard, because the smile was real. This was the good part of every day. Fire and fish and strangers turning into satisfied customers. The whole machine of the family business humming the way it had hummed for 3 generations. 63 summers of boil-overs. Her great-grandfather's kettle. Her father's woodpile. Her name on the sign out front. Bergstrom's. Fish boil at 7. It was the pie she was worried about. She found Dana at the host stand after the last table had been cleared, tallying the reservation book with a pencil behind her ear. Her sister-in-law had run the front of the house for 15 years and had the gift of looking calm while doing 4 things, which made her the opposite of Carl, who did one thing at a time and looked grim throughout. 62 tonight, 68 tomorrow, and Saturday's full, plus a wait list, Dana said. Also, Table 12 wants to know if you cater in Naperville. I told them you don't leave the peninsula. I don't even like leaving the kitchen. Annie untied her apron. What's the cherry count? Dana's pencil stopped. 2 days, maybe 2.5 if Rosa stretches the pies to 8 slices instead of 6. We are not cutting 8 slices. People plan their whole vacation around that pie. Then we have 2 days. Annie leaned against the host stand and let herself feel the weight of it. Any other July, cherries were the one thing on the peninsula nobody had to think about. Door County grew more tart cherries than almost anywhere in the country. Orchards ran down both sides of the highway, from Sister Bay to Sturgeon Bay, and in a few weeks the whole county would smell like pie filling. Bergstrom's had bought its cherries from the same family orchard since before Annie was born. Gus Lund's frozen Montmorencies carried them from May until the fresh crop came in. His truck backed up to the kitchen door every Tuesday and Friday, regular as the tide, except Gus Lund was in the hospital in Sturgeon Bay. He'd fallen from a ladder in his own barn on Sunday, 78 years old, and everyone in town had spent the week saying, "Thank the Lord it wasn't worse," in a tone that admitted it was plenty bad enough. Tuesday had come and gone with no truck. Friday was tomorrow. "I called the orchard office twice," Dana said. "Voicemail's full. Renata at the market says the family's got somebody coming to take things over, but you know how that goes through 4 people. By Sunday, it'll be a Netflix documentary." Annie rubbed her eyes. "Okay, if nothing comes tomorrow, I'll drive up to Larson's and beg." "You could pray about it," Dana said, only half teasing, because she knew Annie already had. "I've been praying about it since Sunday, mostly for Gus." Annie managed a smile. The pie made the prayer list somewhere around Wednesday. Her mother used to keep a card taped above the prep sink, written in her looping church bulletin handwriting, paraphrasing something Jesus said in the book of Matthew. "Don't borrow trouble from tomorrow, because today comes with a full supply of its own." The card was long gone, steamed off the tile years ago, but Annie had read it so many thousand times while scrubbing kettles that it surfaced on its own now, whenever she started stacking worries like cordwood. "Today has enough trouble of its own. Fine, Lord, but if you could see your way to a truckload of cherries, I wouldn't argue." She locked the doors at 10. Outside, Fish Creek had gone quiet the way it did on summer nights. The shops along Main Street dark, the smell of wood smoke and lake water hanging over everything. Out past the marina, the lights of a late boat slid toward the dock, and beyond it, Green Bay stretched black and calm to a horizon she couldn't see but knew by heart. 3 blocks of village, a white steeple, a harbor full of masts. Her whole life fit inside one postcard, and most days she counted that as blessing rather than confinement. Most days. Friday morning, Annie was at the restaurant by 6, because potatoes did not scrub themselves, and Rosa didn't come in until 7. The kitchen was her favorite room on earth at that hour. Steel counters clean and cold. Coffee going, gulls complaining out over the water, the day not yet complicated. At 6:40, a truck turned in off Main Street and backed up to the kitchen door. Annie straightened, dish towel still in her hands. It wasn't Gus's truck. His was a rust-freckled Ford, older than most of her waitstaff, with a tailgate that had to be persuaded. This was a newer pickup. Dark green, mud on the fenders, a magnetic sign on the door. Lund Orchards, established 1934. Out-of-state plates, Michigan plates. Something moved through her then, some current out ahead of understanding, the way the air shifts before you hear the thunder. She stood in the doorway with the towel in her hands and watched the driver's door open. A man stepped down, tall, in a canvas jacket and work boots, and lifted a flat of cherries from the truck bed like it weighed nothing. The first fresh flat she'd seen this season, fruit so red it looked lit from inside. He turned toward the kitchen door, and the morning sun off the harbor caught him full in the face. He was 47 now. There was gray at his temples that had no business being there, and lines at his eyes she had never had the chance to watch arrive. And he was broader than the young man she'd known, weathered the way orchard men got. It didn't matter. She'd have known him across a stadium. She'd have known him in the dark. "Morning," Erik Lund said, and then he actually looked at her, and the flat of cherries went perfectly still in his hands. 22 years collapsed, like a wave running out from under a boat. Annie stood in the doorway of her family's kitchen, holding a dish towel, looking at the man she had promised to marry the summer she was 22, the man whose ring she had given back 3 weeks before the wedding, in April, in the rain, and could not produce one single word of the English language. The gulls went on crying over the harbor. Somewhere behind her, the coffee maker finished with a sigh. "Hello, Annie," Erik said quietly. Lord, she thought, from some far calm corner of herself that was already laughing or crying, she couldn't yet tell which. "I asked you for cherries." Chapter 2. Small Peninsula. There is a version of Annie Bergstrom that can talk to anyone. It performs nightly at 7 o'clock, holds 60 strangers in the palm of its hand, and has never once run out of words. That version was apparently taking the morning off. She began and stopped, because every ending to that sentence was ridiculous. "You're here. You're back. You're holding cherries." "Taking over for Gus," Erik said. "For now. Maybe for good. We're still working that out." He shifted the flat in his hands, and she watched him decide to stand on business the way a drowning man decides to stand on a sandbar. "I'm sorry about Tuesday. I didn't land until Wednesday, and the orchard office looks like a paper recycling plant. I found your standing order last night, frozen's in the truck. 40 pounds, same as always, and the first fresh Montmorencys came ripe on the south rows, so I brought a flat of those too. On the house, for the trouble." "You didn't have to do that?" "I know what the pie means." He said it simply, no freight attached, and somehow that was worse. Of course he knew what the pie meant. He had eaten that pie at her mother's table. He had picked cherries for that pie the summer he was 19, showing off, going up the ladders 2 rungs at a time. They unloaded the truck together because there was no way not to. It took 11 minutes. Annie knew because she watched the kitchen clock the whole time, the way sailors watch a lighthouse. Something fixed, something that meant the world was still turning on schedule. They spoke of cold storage and delivery days. They spoke of Gus, who had a fractured hip and a broken wrist and a room full of church flowers, and who was, in Erik's words, mad enough at that ladder to live to 100. They did not speak of anything else. The air between them was so thick with everything unspoken that Annie was mildly surprised the invoice didn't stick to it. At the door, Erik stopped. Whatever he had planned to say, she watched him set it back down. "Tuesday, then," is what he said instead. "Tuesday," Annie agreed and stood in the doorway, holding a clipboard she had no memory of picking up, watching the green truck pull out onto Main Street and turn north, toward the Orchard Road, exactly the way it used to. Here is what the town knew, if it remembered at all. A long time ago, Annie Bergstrom and Erik Lund were going to be married, and then they weren't, and he moved to Michigan. Here is what Annie knew. 22 years ago this past April, 3 weeks before a wedding with the invitations already mailed, she had driven out to the Lund orchard in the rain, given back the ring, and said words she could still recite. Measured, sensible, airtight words, the kind you build like a seawall so nothing can get through in either direction. Her reasons had seemed like granite at 22. Her father was in a cardiac unit in Green Bay. The restaurant was one bad season from the bank, and Erik had a signed contract and a future that pointed across the lake. She would not think about the rest of it. she had gotten remarkably good at not thinking about the rest of it. 22 years of practice will polish any skill. He had gone to Michigan alone. Within 3 years, word filtered back across the water. Erik Lund got married, someone named Karen, a schoolteacher. They've got an orchard of their own, now near Traverse City. Then, over the years, at the rate of 1 fact per year, a son, another son, a bigger orchard, and 4 years ago, at Bayside Community Church, Pastor Dale had added a name to the Wednesday prayer list, hundreds of miles away and close as a stone in the shoe. The Lund family, on the loss of Erik's wife, Karen, after a long illness. Annie had prayed for him that whole autumn, in the honest, complicated way you pray for someone whose grief you have no right to stand near. Then, she had folded the whole thing up again and put it back on its shelf. The shelf, as of 6:40 this morning, was empty, and everything on it was loose in the room. By Sunday, the Peninsula had done what the Peninsula does. Fish Creek in July holds 10,000 tourists and roughly 200 year-round souls, and news travels through those 200 at speeds modern physics cannot account for. Renata at the market told the Hendricksons that Gus Lund's nephew from Michigan had taken over the orchard. Mrs. Vogel from the quilting circle established by Saturday that he was a widower with 2 boys and had already turned down her offer of a casserole, which she reported as concerning. And at least 4 people found reasons to mention to Annie, idly, in passing, while very busy examining sweet corn, that they hear Erik Lund's back, and wasn't there some old story there? Some old story, Annie repeated to Dana in the restaurant office, where she had retreated with the produce orders and her dignity. 40 years of fish boils. This family has given this town. You'd think that would be the story. Dana wound a rubber band around the receipts with the serenity of a woman settling in. 63 years, and no honey. Romance beats whitefish every time. She let a moment go by. He came into the market Saturday. Renata says he bought oatmeal, coffee, and about 9 frozen pizzas, which tracks with a teenager in the house. The younger boy's with him, 16, tall. Looks like he'd rather be anywhere on Earth. You've built quite a file. I have sources, I never reveal them. Dana's voice gentled. You want to talk about it? There's nothing to talk about. He delivers cherries. I make pie. This is the entire relationship. Said Dana in the tone Wisconsin women use instead of a polygraph. Carl was even more efficient. He came into the kitchen Monday while Annie was breaking down whitefish, stacked the split birch by the door the way he'd done 10,000 times, and stood there a moment with his gloves in his hand. Her brother had been 19, the spring it all happened. He had never once asked her why, which she'd always suspected was the largest gift anyone had ever given her. You okay? Carl said. I'm okay. He nodded, took the trash out, and that was the whole conversation. Annie went back to the whitefish and found her eyes stinging, which made no sense at all, and she blamed the onions, which were across the room. Monday night, after close, she sat at the steel prep table with a cup of decaf and Gus Lund's supply contract, which Dana had pulled from the file cabinet with a lawyer's timing and no comment whatsoever. There it was, in Gus's typewriter font, renewed every spring since before her parents retired. Lund Orchards agrees to supply Bergstrom's restaurant, Fish Creek, with tart cherries, frozen and fresh in season. Deliveries Tuesdays and Fridays, May through the last Friday of August. The last Friday of August. 9 more weeks. 18 more Tuesdays and Fridays of a green truck backing up to her kitchen door at 6:40 in the morning, driven by the one person on this 70-mile peninsula she had spent 22 years arranging her life to never stand next to. She could get the cherries elsewhere. Larson's would take the account in a heartbeat. There were a dozen orchards inside 20 minutes. 1 phone call, 1 polite letter. Given the transition, we've decided. And the shelf could be restocked, the seawall repaired, everything watertight by Friday. Her hand was actually resting on her phone when she caught herself. And there it is, she thought. The Annie Bergstrom solution. See the wave coming, seal the hatches, cut the line. Fast, clean, sensible. She was 44 years old, and she had begun, lately, in church, mostly, in the quiet after the sermon when a person can't hide from her own furniture, to wonder what that speed had ever actually saved her from. And what it had cost. There was a difference. It had occurred to her somewhere around 40, between peace and the absence of weather. She knew how to manufacture the second one. She was no longer certain she had ever held the first. The Bible says there's a right time for everything. That's in Ecclesiastes, her father's favorite, the one he'd read aloud every New Year's over pickled herring while her mother rolled her eyes with love. A time to plant and a time to pull up, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to keep and a time to throw away. The trouble with that list, Annie thought, was that it never said which time it currently was. That part, apparently, you had to take to the Lord in person. She put the phone down, out of reach, next to the flat of Erik's cherries. She'd been calling it that in her head all weekend, Erik's cherries, which was its own kind of information. The fruit sat glowing under the kitchen lights. The first sweetness of a season she hadn't asked for and could no longer send back. "All right, Lord," she said out loud to the empty kitchen, to the harbor dark beyond the window, to whoever had answered a prayer for cherries with an entire orchard and its whole complicated family. "You clearly have my attention. I'd appreciate knowing what you're planting. Because if this is a demolition..." Her voice wobbled, and she steadied it the way she steadied everything. "I'd appreciate knowing that, too." The refrigerator hummed. The harbor light turned, out at the end of the dock, sweeping its slow, reliable circle. Tuesday was one day away. Chapter 3. A Time for Everything. Bayside Community. Church sat 2 blocks up the hill from the harbor, white clapboard and green shutters, with a steeple you could see from the water and a gravel parking lot that had hosted more potlucks than cars. It had been built in 1887 by Norwegian fishermen and Swedish farmers who couldn't agree on much except Jesus and the need for a good stove, and Annie had occupied the 4th pew on the left, harbor side, her entire remembering life. Her family's pew, the way the kettle was her family's kettle. No plaque, no deed, just a century of Bergstroms wearing a soft spot into the oak. A week and a half had passed since the green truck first backed up to her kitchen door. 2 more deliveries had come and gone since, Tuesday, then Friday, both at 6:40 sharp, both conducted with the flawless courtesy of 2 diplomats from small nations that had once been at war. Crates, invoices, Gus's progress report, 11 minutes, done. Annie had begun to think they might actually manage it. A whole summer of this, polite and sealed, like shipping something fragile in enough bubble wrap that nothing inside could shift. So she was settled in her pew that Sunday, 3rd week of July, feeling more or less in command of herself again, right up until 2 minutes past 10, when the sanctuary door opened and the whole congregation performed the small-town miracle of not turning around while seeing everything. Erik Lund walked in with his son. They took the back pew, Bayside. The boy, Leif, tall as his father, and folded into himself like a lawn chair, sat with his arms crossed and his eyes on the floorboards. Erik sat straight with his ball cap in his lap. He had grown up in this church, same as Annie. He'd been carried into it as a baby and sat through Sunday school in its basement. 22 years ago, this was the sanctuary where the 2 of them were supposed to stand up and be married. As far as Annie knew, he had not been through its doors since. And now, here he was, looking like a man who had finally stopped finding reasons to drive past. Annie faced forward and studied the hymn board with the focus of a scholar. Of course he came. Gus is on the prayer list. This is his church too. It was always going to be his church too. Beside her, Dana slid one wintergreen lifesaver onto Annie's side of the pew rack, which was Dana for steady on. Then Pastor Dale stood up, opened his Bible, and said, "This morning we're going to be in Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, and Annie nearly laughed out loud. Really, Lord, subtle. Pastor Dale Sorensen was 70, built like a fireplug, and had shepherded Bayside for 36 years, while fixing his own roof and most of the widows' roofs besides. He read the famous verses plainly. No theater. A season for everything. A right time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pull up what's planted. To tear down and to build. To weep and to laugh. To keep and to throw away. To be silent and to speak." Now, most of us like this passage, Dale said, closing the Bible over his thumb. It's on our kitchen towels. Somebody made it into a song back before I had gray hair, and we hum along. And I'd like to suggest to you this morning that we've hummed it so long, we've stopped hearing what a hard word it is. He came out from behind the pulpit, which at Bayside meant business. Because notice what the passage doesn't say. It doesn't say there's a season for everything, and here's the schedule. It doesn't hand you the calendar. It says the times are real, and they are appointed. And then it leaves the appointing to God. You know who understands this better than anybody in Door County? Our orchard folks. A low ripple of knowing amusement moved through the pews. Nobody turned around, and everybody thought about the back row. You cannot argue a cherry tree into July. You can fertilize, you can prune, you can pray, and you should, all three. But you cannot stand in that orchard in the middle of May and demand the fruit. And friends, if you get impatient and pick it green, you know exactly what you get. You get something that looks like a cherry, hangs like a cherry, photographs beautifully, and turns your whole mouth bitter. A little further on, Ecclesiastes says God makes everything beautiful in its time. In its time, not in ours. The fruit isn't sweet because you wanted it sooner. It's sweet in its season, and only there. And here is the hard grace of it. The God who appointed the season is the same God who was faithful to that tree all winter when it stood out there bare and looked for all the world like nothing was ever going to happen again. So some of you came in here this morning asking the Lord the question I ask him most. What time is it? Is it time to plant or pull up? Hold on or let go? Speak or keep still? And I want to gently suggest that's the second question. The first question is, do I trust the one who keeps the time? Because friends, you can misread a season. I've done it. You've done it. But you cannot outwait, outrun, or outplan a faithful God. He redeems even our misread calendars. Settle the first question. Dale spread his hands. And the second one ripens on its own. They stood and sang, "Great is thy faithfulness," which Annie got through until summer and winter and springtime and harvest, and then mouthed the rest, because her throat had quit on her. In the fourth pew, harbor side, she held the hymnal and asked the question straight, without any of her usual furniture in front of it. Do I trust you with the calendar, Lord? Even the pages I tore out myself. From the back of the church, 2 rows of Lund men sang the melody low, one of them not singing at all. Coffee hour at Bayside took place in a fellowship hall, paneled in 1974, and smelling permanently of percolator coffee and bar cookies. Annie had a system for coffee hour that involved the far table, a stack of dirty cream pitchers, and looking indispensable, and she was executing it flawlessly when Marilyn Sorensen materialized beside her with 2 cups and the expression of a woman who had watched the 4th pew all morning. The pastor's wife was in her late 60s, silver-haired, comfortable as a Sunday afternoon, and widely understood to be the actual load-bearing wall of Bayside Community Church. She handed Annie a coffee. "So," Marilyn said, "Erik Lund." "Marilyn, I have pictures." "The pictures have waited 50 years. They'll hold." Marilyn settled against the counter, easy as the tide. "He looks good. Sad around the edges, but good. The boy's furious, poor thing. That's the move. And the mother, and being 16, all in one sweatshirt." She sipped. "You've seen him. Erik, I mean. Cherries twice a week, Renata mentioned." "Renata should work for the government." Annie kept her hands busy with the pictures. "It's fine. It's cordial. He's a good supplier. The Montmorencys are gorgeous this year." Said Marilyn, who had known her since grade school. "It was 22 years ago. It's ancient history. Rome fell. We've all moved on." "Annie." Marilyn said it kindly, and that was the trouble with Marilyn. She did everything kindly, including seeing straight through you. "I was there. I stood in your mother's kitchen that April and helped her write the notes for returning the wedding gifts. 41 boxes. I remember the toaster." She let that sit just long enough. "I have never once asked you about it, because it was never once my business. It still isn't, but history doesn't stay ancient when it starts delivering to your kitchen door twice a week, dear heart, and you have been beating those pictures to death for 10 minutes. Annie looked down. The pitcher in her hand was, in fairness, extremely clean. "I don't know what to do with it," she heard herself say, quietly, which was more than she had said to anyone. Dana, Carl, the Lord himself in complete sentences. In 12 days. "I know," Marilyn said. "You don't have to know today. That was rather Dale's whole point, and I'd hate for a sermon that good to go to waste." She took the pitcher gently out of Annie's hands and set it down. "Here's all I'll say, and then I'll go rescue the bar cookies from the Hendrickson boys. When you're ready to talk about it honestly, not the cordial version, not the supplier version, the true one, my kitchen table is available. Tuesdays I bake, the table's seen worse, and so have I." She squeezed Annie's arm and moved off through the fellowship hall, leaving Annie by the pitchers, with her coffee going cold, and the odd, unsteady feeling of a door standing open in a house she'd kept locked for 22 years. Out the window, down the hill, the harbor glittered. Somewhere north of town, an orchard stood in the July sun, doing the only thing an orchard ever does. Ripening. Chapter 4. Storm Warning. The forecast turned on a Wednesday, the way July forecasts do on a peninsula with water on both sides. Fine, 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 and then a red-bordered box on every phone in Door County. Severe thunderstorms Thursday evening. Straight-line winds to 60. And the word that made every grower between Sturgeon Bay and Gills Rock go quiet in the middle of whatever they were doing. Hail. Annie heard it from Dana, who heard it from Renata, who had it from the horse's mouth. Erik Lund had walked into the market that morning, bought every cooler and box fan on the shelf, and told Renata that the South Rose, the early rose, the ones carrying the first ripe fruit of the season, would not survive a hailstorm, and he had roughly 30 hours to get whatever was ready off those trees. Gus's regular picking crew wasn't due for 10 more days. It was him and a 16-year-old. So Renata called Mrs. Vogel, Dana reported, and Mrs. Vogel called the prayer chain, and Pastor Dale got up this morning and turned the prayer chain into a phone tree. And the long and short of it is half of Bayside's turning up at Lund Orchards tomorrow with ladders. She untied her apron with the air of a woman whose mind was made up. "Rosa can prep Friday's boil without us until 3. I'm going. Carl's coming after the lunch delivery." Annie kept wiping the counter that did not need wiping. "You'd be protecting your pie supply," Dana offered generously, and had the decency not to smile while she said it. Well, Lord, Annie thought. You do keep the calendar interesting. Lund Orchard sat on 80 acres of high ground off the county road between Fish Creek and Egg Harbor, where the limestone shelf under the peninsula rose close to the surface and the trees had been fighting it, contentedly since 1934. Annie had not driven up that gravel lane in 22 years. It was shorter than she remembered. Everything about the place was smaller and older and achingly the same. The red barn with Lund painted ghost pale on the south wall, the farmhouse porch, the rows and rows and rows of cherry trees running down toward the glitter of Green Bay, loaded with fruit like red ornaments, rose deep with a bruise-colored sky already building on the far side of the water. Half of Bayside had indeed turned up. Mrs. Vogel was installed at a card table by the barn, with sandwiches and a cash box nobody had asked for. Pastor Dale was up a ladder in row 2, picking with the doggedness of a man who tithed in all things. Teenagers from the youth group were being paid in cherries they were mostly eating, and moving through all of it, hatless, sleeves rolled, went Erik Lund, setting ladders, running full lugs to the cooling shed, saying, "Thank you, watch that limb." Thank you about 40 times an hour, with the controlled urgency of a man watching a year's work hang by 30 hours of weather. He stopped short when he saw her. Whole seconds went by. "You know how to pick," he said finally. Not a question. She'd picked these very rows the summer she was 17, 18, 19, and they both knew it, and the knowledge stood there between them wearing a straw hat. "Point me at a row, Captain." Something crossed his face, the old joke, "Aye, aye, Captain," from a boy who'd once wanted a boat before the orchard claimed him, and was gone. "Row 6, he said. "Fruit's heaviest mid-slope. And Annie, thank you." "Thank the phone tree," she said, and went to row 6 and picked. There is a mercy in shared work. That conversation never quite matches. For 3 hours, Annie filled lugs in the green light under the leaves, hands remembering everything, the little twist, cluster into the palm, stems on, while around her the orchard hummed with church people and ladder legs, and somebody's radio playing polka, softly out of pure Wisconsin instinct. She could see Erik 2 rows over, and it was, she discovered, entirely possible to be aware of a man's exact location for 3 consecutive hours while achieving a personal best in cherry tonnage. The Bible says the seed grows while the farmer sleeps, and he can't explain how. Gus used to quote that from the book of Mark, standing in these rows, back when she was 19 and the future was a straight and obvious road. Watching the church empty the south rows crate by crate ahead of the weather, Annie thought Gus had it right. The whole place ran on a growth nobody could take credit for. And today, even the harvest was being done by grace, in borrowed hands, ahead of a storm. Mid-afternoon, she came down her ladder for empty lugs and found herself at the water cooler next to Leif. The boy was 6 feet of elbows in a Traverse City Central hoodie, despite the heat, earbuds in, working like a mule and looking at nobody. Up close, he had Erik's jaw and somebody else's eyes, Karen's, Annie supposed, with a strange soft drop of the heart, and the unmistakable air of a kid doing forced labor in a foreign country. "You're the fish lady," he said, which were his first words to her. One earbud came out, which she understood from the restaurant's teenage staff to be a significant diplomatic concession. "Annie, your cherries make my pie." "They're not my cherries." It came out flat and fast, the door slamming before anything could get in. "They're my great-uncle's. We're just—" He shrugged the shrug of a boy whose sentence had nowhere good to go. "Whatever. Dad says maybe a year." Ah, Annie thought. There it is. She filled her water cup and did not do any of the things adults had presumably been doing to this boy for weeks. Didn't say, "You'll love it here." Didn't say, "Give it a chance." Didn't mention the mother he wasn't mentioning. "For what it's worth," she said, "the fish lady pays cash wages to anyone who can carry 40 pounds and tolerate my brother, in case a year needs financing." She nodded at his full lugs. "You pick clean. Stems on. That's rarer than you'd think." Leif looked at her, a quick, suspicious flick, checking the sentence for hidden vegetables, then put his earbud back in. But the shoulders came down half an inch, and he took the empty lugs with him. The storm came at 7, arriving over Green Bay like a piano falling downstairs. The last pickers were shooed into the barn as the first fat drops hit, and then the rain came sideways, and the tin roof roared, and 40 members of Bayside Community Church stood in the sudden dark among the tractors, passing Mrs. Vogel's thermoses, while Pastor Dale said, easily, into the din, "Lord, we did what our hands could do. The rest of these trees are yours, same as always." And everybody said, "Amen," and then watched the doorway in silence. Annie found Erik at the barn door, watching 60 years of his family's work stand out in it. Wind, and rain in hammering sheets. And no hail. 20 minutes, and the piano moved on down the peninsula, grumbling, and a low orange evening light broke out under the departing clouds and lit every wet tree like glass. The church folk cheered and went squelching out to their cars. Annie stayed to help stack the last lugs into the cooling shed, and that is how she came to be standing beside Erik Lund in row 6 at dusk in the drip and shine of the past storm, both of them soaked to the elbows, surveying rows that had bent and held. "Lost some limbs on the old Montmorencies," Erik said. "Kept the crop, kept most of the crop." He let out a long breath, and with it, visibly, 30 hours of wait. "I forgot what this place is like. Traverse City, we hired crews and watched radar. Here, I make one phone call to a pastor and the whole church empties my south rows and prays over my rootstock." He shook his head slowly. 22 years, and Door County still shows up. "It's the phone tree," Annie said. "Fear of Mrs. Vogel moves mountains." He laughed, the actual laugh, sudden and low, the one she had not heard since she was 22 years old, and it went through her like the boil-over goes through the crowd, everyone knowing it's coming and jumping anyway. The laugh faded into something quieter. They stood in the wet row, an arm's length apart, in the kind of light that forgives everything it touches. "Gus gets moved to the rehab place in Sister Bay Monday," Erik said. "He's ornery, which the doctors say is excellent." He turned a wet leaf over with one finger, careful as a man handling something that wasn't the leaf. "Karen's been gone 4 years now. The boys and I are," he considered it honestly, "all right, mostly. Anders is at Michigan State, Ag Science. He calls his brother every Sunday whether Leif answers or not. And Leif is furious at every single thing in the state of Wisconsin, except, as of this afternoon, possibly you. He told me the fish lady offered him a job. The fish lady's offers are legally binding. He might take it." Erik looked at her then, straight on, the evening light full in his weathered face. And for a moment the bubble wrap and the diplomacy and the 11-minute deliveries all fell away, and it was just the two of them standing in an orchard where they had both been young. "It's strange," he said quietly. "Everything on this peninsula is exactly where I left it. The church, the harbor, the trees, and none of it is the same at all, and I can't—" He stopped and chose the honest ending. "I keep looking for the map. There's no map." "No?" Annie thought, with her heart going strangely and traitorously loud. "There's no map. There's a forecast, a phone tree, and a God who keeps the calendar, and none of them will tell me what season this is." "Thank you for today," Erik said. "I mean it, Annie." "Tuesday," she said, because it was the only safe word she had left. Tuesday, he agreed. And she drove down the gravel lane in the last of the light, wet and cherry-stained and 44 years old, with the rearview mirror full of a man standing alone in his saved orchard and did not turn on the radio the whole way home. Chapter 5. Anderson Dock. It happened on a Tuesday, at the tailgate of the green truck, over a signed invoice. Erik took the clipboard back, and then he didn't leave. He stood there turning his pen over in his fingers, a man visibly assembling a sentence out of parts, and Annie, who had 11 minutes down to a science, felt the science leave the room. Mondays, he said finally. The restaurant's dark on Mondays. I remember that much. He looked up. Would you take a walk with me some Monday evening? He navigated it honestly. I'm not going to pretend I know what to call it. Two people who used to know each other. Walking. Maybe ice cream. I've been back a month, and I haven't been anywhere on this peninsula that isn't the orchard, the hospital, or your kitchen door, and the truth is there's nobody I'd... He stopped himself, recalibrated to something safer. You'd be doing a hermit a kindness. Every seawall Annie owned filed an objection. She heard herself say, Monday, 7 o'clock, anyway, in the voice of a woman jumping off a dock before the committee could vote, and Erik nodded twice, once for yes, once, it seemed, for courage, and drove off north with her signature. Ice cream, Dana repeated later, with dangerous calm, from the office doorway. Groceries, Dana? It's basically groceries. Said Dana, and went to tell Carl, who said nothing at such length that it could be heard from the kitchen. Monday evening came in the gold-plated way July evenings do on the west side of the peninsula, and Ephraim lay along its harbor like something a watercolorist had gotten slightly too sentimental about. The white church steeples, the white inns and cottages banked up the green hillside. The whole village, dressed in its historic whites, above the blue sheet of Eagle Harbor. Erik bought them cones at the old ice cream parlor by the water. Cherry, he said to the kid at the counter, nodding at Annie. She'll say she wants to look at the flavors, and then she'll get cherry. And Annie stood there in line, betrayed, laughing, while 22 years failed to matter for whole minutes at a time. They walked out onto Anderson Dock as the sun went long. The old stone and timber dock ran into the harbor beside the historic warehouse that had stood there since before the Civil War, its weathered walls painted stem to stern with names, generations of boats and sailors and honeymooners leaving their marks in white and red and blue, decades deep, names over names over names. The evening light came off the water and lit the whole thing, like a stained glass window made by amateurs, which Annie had always privately thought was the best kind. I keep thinking about these walls, Erik said. They stood before the layered names, cones in hand, the harbor going rose gold behind them. Everybody wants it written down somewhere, don't they? We were here. It mattered. He was quiet a while. Karen would have loved this dock. I kept meaning to bring her over the lake. There was always a harvest, or a tuition bill, or... He turned his cone slowly. There was always something. You think you're in the middle of the story. Turns out sometimes you're near the end, and nobody's told you. Will you tell me about her? Annie asked. It cost her something, and it was also, she found, entirely sincere. Both at once. The way the harbor could be gold and cold in the same evening. Only if you want. He did want, it turned out. He talked for a long time, easier as he went. Karen, the schoolteacher who'd married a man with dirt under his nails and learned to run a sorting line. Karen, who labeled the freezer and sang alto and made the boys write thank you notes. Karen, who found the lump in an ordinary October and was gone before the 2nd June. Ovarian, Erik said, looking at the water. Fast and then slow, and then fast. The boys were 13 and 10 when she was diagnosed. He told it plainly, no bid for pity in it anywhere, and Annie listened the way Carl had taught her, without ever saying so. All the way through, adding nothing. "The last winter, I read to her," he said. She couldn't hold the book anymore. She had me read the Psalms mostly. There's one that says, "We wait for the Lord the way night watchmen wait for morning." More than watchmen for the morning, it says twice. Like the writer didn't trust us to feel it the first time. His voice stayed level. His hand on the dock rail did not entirely. I used to look at her sleeping and think, that's the realest sentence in the world. A watchman doesn't make the morning come. Can't rush it, can't earn it. He just stays at his post, because he knows the kind of thing morning is. It comes. Karen knew that better than me. She'd say, "Erik, I'm not waiting to get better anymore. I'm just waiting for morning, and both of us know it'll come." He cleared his throat. She was not wrong. She was never wrong. It was very annoying, and I'd give the whole orchard to be annoyed one more time. Annie laughed, wet-eyed, which was evidently the correct response, because some tension went out of him, and they walked slowly down the dock through the last of the gold. "Your turn," Erik said. 22 years, and don't give me the supplier version." "What were they, Annie?" "Truly." So she told him, truly, or most of the way there. Her father's second heart attack and his slow, cussed recovery. The winter the bank nearly called it, and the spring she talked them out of it. Her parents' retirement to a condo in Green Bay, from which they still issued opinions about the chowder. Carl growing from a 19-year-old who burned himself weekly into the steadiest boilmaster on the Peninsula. Dana, the nieces, Emma at Lawrence University, Grace with the 2 babies, rebuilding the dining room after the ice dam flood, 10,000 boilovers, a whole town that fit in a postcard, and her fingerprints on every inch of it. "It was a good life," she said. "It is a good life. I chose it, and I'd choose it again. Mostly." The word got out before she could stop it, and then it stood there on the dock between them, small and enormous, refusing to be ice cream or groceries or anything safe at all. Erik didn't pounce on it. That was the thing she had forgotten about him, she realized, that he had never once in his life pounced. He only looked at her, gray-templed, evening-lit, and let the word be as big as it was. "Mostly." He repeated it gently and let it go. "Well, that's more honesty than I bought with 1 cone. I owe you change." The sun went into Green Bay the way it does off Ephraim, with the whole harbor burning quietly for 10 minutes, and neither of them said anything important for the rest of the walk, and it was somehow the least empty silence Annie had stood inside in years. At the dock stairs, where the old stone steps dropped uneven to the beach path, Erik went down first and turned and put his hand up, and she took it, warm, work-rough, entirely familiar after 22 years, which should not have been possible. And he held it a moment past the last step, 1 moment, maybe 2. Then he let go, honorably, and the 2 of them walked back through Ephraim's white and gold evening, talking about rootstock, of all things, while Annie's hand went on ringing like a struck bell. She sat up late that night at the kitchen table in her little house on Cottage Row, with her tea gone cold and her Bible open, because there was no chance whatsoever of sleep, and she knew better than to lie there manufacturing arguments. She found the psalm Erik had read to his dying wife, Psalm 130. It was short. "Out of the depths I call to you, Lord," and then the lines he'd quoted about waiting. "I wait for the Lord, my whole soul waits, and in his word I put my hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning, more than watchmen for the morning." Twice, like the writer didn't trust us to feel it the first time. Annie sat with her hand flat on the page, and the kitchen very quiet, and the harbor light sweeping its slow circle out beyond the dark trees. and she made herself say the true thing to the only one who'd been present for all of it. "I know something about Watchman Lord." Her eyes stung. 22 years at my post. The boil at 7, the books at 10, the pew on Sunday. Everything faithful, everything running, and underneath all of it, the whole time, a woman standing a night watch she never admitted she was standing. Waiting for something she told everyone, including you, including herself, she'd decided against. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the shore, a late boat knocked gently against a dock. "I don't know if he's the morning," she prayed, honest as she'd ever been in her life. "That's your calendar, and I'm through pretending I can read it in the dark, but I'm done lying about the waiting. You've watched me wait for 22 years. Scripture says you keep count of our sleepless watches, so you knew before I did." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, laughed a little, unsteady at the state of herself. "A watchman doesn't make the morning come." "Fine, I hear it. But Lord, if morning's coming, please don't let me be the one who talks herself out of the sunrise. I have some history there." She closed the Bible, washed the mug, turned off the lamp. Out on the point, the lighthouse went on turning, patient as a promise, sweeping the dark water for whoever needed to know where the harbor was. Chapter 6. What Happened in April. The rain came back the first Thursday of August, and this time it meant it, a slow, gray, all-day soaker, the kind the orchards drink and the tourists sulk at. By 4 o'clock, the radar showed nothing but green crawling over the peninsula for hours, and Annie made the call she made maybe twice a summer. No fire tonight. You cannot boil a kettle in a downpour, and you cannot ask 60 people in ponchos to enjoy watching you try. Dana worked the phones moving reservations. The dining room served a quiet indoor menu to the diehards, and by 8:30, the last table had paid. The staff was gone, and Annie was alone in the dining room with the lights half down, rolling silverware she didn't need to roll, listening to the rain type its endless letter on the windows. At 8:45, headlights swung into the lot, and the green truck backed up to the kitchen door. "Saw your fire wasn't lit," Erik said at the door, rain dripping off his cap brim. He had the Friday crates a night early. "Forecast says worse before it's better tomorrow, and I didn't like the odds of loading in a downpour at 6 in the morning. Didn't want you short for the weekend." They stacked the crates in together. Friday's order was Friday's order. The weekend would want its pie, whether or not tonight's fire ever lit. Still, 6:40 tomorrow would have done just fine, and the orchard was 4 minutes up the road, and they both knew it. The reason was sound enough. It was also, Annie noticed, with a small unsteadiness somewhere under her apron, a reason. And then, because the rain was loud and the building was empty, and some doors open on their own schedule, Annie heard herself say, "The coffee's still on, if you want to get dry before you drive back." So it happened there, where it was probably always going to happen. In the empty dining room of Bergstrom's, at the corner table by the dark window, with 2 mugs of decaf and the rain coming down on the roof her great-grandfather had shingled. 22 years of Tuesdays, and it came down to a rained-out Thursday. For a while they managed the easy things. Gus, sitting up now, terrorizing the rehab staff in Sister Bay. Leif, who had worked his first 2 boil nights, hauling wood for Carl and come home. Erik reported with wonder, talkative, the crop, the weather, the fall. Then a silence arrived and would not leave, and Erik turned his mug slowly on the table and looked at it, rather than her, and said, "Annie, I'm going to ask you something, and if you tell me to take my coffee and go home, I'll go. And Tuesday will still be Tuesday. But I'm 47 years old, and I've buried a wife, and I've learned the hard way what happens to the questions you save for later." He looked up. "What happened in April?" The rain typed on the glass. "You were there," Annie said quietly. "I was there for the last 20 minutes of it. I've had 22 years to memorize those 20 minutes, and I still can't make them add up." His voice stayed even, but there was something underneath it now, far down, like current under ice. "You drove out to the orchard in the rain. You had it all in order. You always had everything in order. The ring in the little box, and the reasons. 1, 2, 3, like a bank turning down a loan. Your dad's heart, the restaurant, my contract. It's nobody's fault, Erik. The timing is impossible. Someday you'll thank me." He said her old words without cruelty, which was worse. He said them like a man reciting a psalm he'd never wanted to learn. "And then you shook my hand." Annie. 3 weeks before our wedding, you shook my hand. "I remember," she said, because she did. Every frame of it. "So, tell me the part I wasn't there for. Because I have never believed, not for one day in 22 years, that I got the whole accounting." And so, at last, in her family's empty restaurant, Annie opened the books. "Dad's heart attack was the second Tuesday of April," she said. "You know that part. What you don't know is what the doctor told Mom and me in the hallway. That his heart was damaged badly, that he wasn't coming back to the fire, maybe not ever. And Mom just folded, right there in the hallway. She kept saying, 'The season starts in 6 weeks. The season starts in 6 weeks.'" Annie's hands had gone flat on the table, steadying against the wood. "And that same week, the same week, Erik, the bank called about the loan Dad had taken to redo the kitchen. And I'm standing in the hospital parking lot with my wedding binder in the back seat, doing arithmetic. Mom couldn't run it. Carl was 19, and my whole life was supposed to start in Traverse City in June. I told you I'd break the contract." Erik's voice was low. "I stood in the barn and told you, 'Say it, and I'll call Henderson in the morning and tear it up.' And it would have wrecked you." The old certainty surged up in her, still warm after all these years, like a coal she'd never once let go out. "That contract was everything you'd worked for since you were 15. 3 years managing the biggest operation on the lake, and then everything after that. You'd have given it up and stood next to me at that kettle. And I did the arithmetic on that too, Erik. I did arithmetic for 2 straight days without sleeping, and every column said the same thing. If you stayed, someday you'd look at me across that fire and see the woman who cost you your life. And I couldn't. Her voice caught, and she forced it level. The old discipline. I decided I couldn't survive being that woman, so I made sure I'd never have to find out." The words landed in the quiet dining room, and Annie heard them as if someone else had said them, heard for the first time out loud what they actually were. Not an accounting, a verdict she'd handed down at 22, on evidence from a trial she'd never held. Erik sat very still for a long moment. 2 days, he said at last. You decided the rest of both our lives in 2 days, alone, in a hospital parking lot? He rubbed a hand down his face. Annie, do you know what I'd have said if you'd shown me the arithmetic instead of the verdict? I'd have said Henderson's contract had a start date, not a soul. I'd have said give me 1 season at the kettle and let's see. I'd have said we, Annie. Some version of we. There were 100 doors out of that hallway, and you sealed every one of them so fast. And now, the current came up through the ice, 22 years of it, his voice not rising but hardening, each word set down like a stone. You didn't choose the restaurant over me. I could have lived with that. People have chosen harder things over each other since the world began. You decided who I was. You decided what I'd resent. what I'd regret, what I'd turn into. You tried me in 2 days and convicted me of a bitterness I never got the chance to refuse. And then you shook my hand." He stopped, steadied, and then, quieter, the worst question yet. "The letter, that October, did it come?" The rain filled the silence for 3 breaths. 4. "It came," Annie said. "Did you read it?" "Yes." Her eyes were burning now. "Erik, say the word and I'm on the next ferry." That's what it said. 6 months in, I didn't care about Henderson or the contract or any of it. I asked you for one word. His voice had gone level and terrible, the calm of a man at the bottom of the depth chart. "I checked that post office box until Christmas, Annie. I'd tell myself. Mail's slow off the Peninsula. She's caring for her dad. She's busy with the season." He looked at her, and there was no anger left in his face at all anymore, which was the unbearable part. There was only the original wound, 22 years old, exactly as deep as the day it was made. "One word." "I read it 11 times, she whispered. "I still have it, and I couldn't answer it, because answering meant admitting the arithmetic was wrong, and if the arithmetic was wrong..." Her voice broke, finally, all the way. "Then I had thrown us away for nothing, and I couldn't live in a world where that was true. So I built one where it wasn't. And I have run that world for 22 years, Erik, 6 nights a week, and it has a very good pie." The clock over the kitchen door ticked. The rain was letting up at last, without permission. Erik stood. He did it slowly, and he took his cap off the chair, and Annie watched him gather himself back into the courteous, careful man who delivered her cherries, and understood she was watching a door close from the inside. "I need you to hear one thing," he said at the kitchen door, not turning around. "I didn't come back to Fish Creek for this. I came for Gus and the trees. Whatever's been, these last weeks..." He stopped. His shoulders rose and fell once. "I spent 3 years hating a girl in a parking lot. Karen spent the next 15 married to whatever was left after that, and she deserved better, and mostly she got it, because she was patient and God is good." "I can't do it again, Annie. I can't stand at a post office box at 50. Not for anybody. Not even..." And the sentence ended there, which told her exactly how it would have ended. "Thank you for the coffee," Erik Lund said quietly. "Crates are in the walk-in." The door shut soft behind him, which was somehow worse than slamming, and the truck lights swept the rain-streaked window and were gone. Annie sat alone at the corner table in her family's restaurant for a long time. The Bible says there's a time to be silent and a time to speak, and she had gotten them exactly, catastrophically backwards. 22 years ago, she had spoken a verdict when she should have been silent and asked and then kept silent. 1 October, when a single spoken word would have turned the whole world on its hinge. She had always believed her sin was the choice itself. Sitting in the dark with 2 cold mugs, she finally saw it plain. The choice had been fear, but the silence had been pride, the refusal to be wrong. 11 readings and no reply. "Out of the depths I call to you, Lord." She didn't have any other words, so she used the Psalms and found they fit the way her mother's apron fit, like something made by somebody who knew her size before she did. Out of the depths. Later, at home on Cottage Row, she stood on a kitchen chair and took down the cedar box from the top of her closet, the one that had migrated houses with her twice, without ever being opened. The envelope inside had gone soft at the corners, the way paper does when it's been read 11 times and held more often than that. Traverse City postmark, October 12th, 2004. She didn't read it, she wasn't ready, and she knew the difference now between not ready and never. She just sat on the edge of her bed, holding 22 years of unanswered mail against the flat of her chest. While out on the point, the lighthouse turned and turned, sweeping the dark for whoever was still out there, and asked God the only question left standing. Is there a time to speak? After the time to speak is over? Chapter 7. Marilyn's Kitchen Table. The deliveries did not stop. That was the thing about Erik Lund that undid her a little more each time. The door had closed, and the crates kept coming. Tuesday, Friday, 6:40. The full order, the fruit impeccable, the courtesy so complete it was its own kind of grief. He asked after the pie. She asked after Gus. 11 minutes. If Chapter 1 of the summer had been bubble wrap, this was museum glass. Everything visible, nothing touchable. Do not tap on the case. Leif, meanwhile, kept showing up. That was the strange grace of the whole cold week, whatever had passed between the adults. Nobody had told the boy, and Saturday at 5, he dumped his bike against the woodpile and came banging through the kitchen door in his hoodie, on time for his third boil night, and took up his station at Carl's woodpile like a man defending a homestead. He'd learned the fire. He'd learned the kettle count. He had absorbed, apparently in one evening, Carl's entire philosophy of tourists, which fit on an index card and was mostly the word Illinois, and the two of them ran the boil in an operatic silence, broken by an average of 9 words an hour, none of them wasted. Annie fed him after close. A cook's plate at the steel counter, whitefish and potatoes and a slab of pie, and did not ask about his father, and Leif, between forkfuls, volunteered anyway. Dad's being weird, he reported. Weirder. He reorganized the sorting shed. It was organized. He ate some pie. Anders says when Dad alphabetizes things, you're supposed to make him go bowling, but I don't have a license till October, so... Shrug. Anyway, he does this thing where he stands at the end of the south rows at night. Just stands there. Oh, thought Annie, around the specific ache of it. The rows I helped pick. More pie? She said, and Leif, 16, said yes. Tuesday morning, Annie did something she had not done in a dozen years. She left Rosa the prep list and went to the women's Bible study at Bayside Community Church. They met at 9 in the fellowship hall. 8 or 9 women around 2 card tables pushed together, coffee in the good carafe, Marilyn presiding with her reading glasses down her nose. The demographics ran from Dana, who had been threatening to bring Annie for a decade and now sat radiating vindication, up through Renata and the Hendrickson girl's mother, to Mrs. Vogel, who at 81 treated scripture the way she treated quilting. No loose threads, no shortcuts, and absolutely no mercy. They were working through the Psalms of Ascent. And the calendar, God's calendar, Annie was learning to notice, had them at Psalm 130. Out of the depths I cry to you, Marilyn read, and set the Bible down flat. Now, before anybody says anything churchy, who here has been in the depths? Hands. Every hand at the table went up, including, after a half second, Annie's. What followed was 90 minutes unlike anything Annie's Sundays had prepared her for. Mrs. Vogel, it emerged, had spent 1987 unable to get out of bed after her Walter died, and told it plainly, needle still moving. Renata talked about her son in Milwaukee, 4 years sober now. You want to know what waiting more than watchman means. Sit up nights while your child fights that. And the mothers at the table breathed amen, like it cost them something. The psalm got smaller and sharper as it passed around the table, less like literature and more like a tool everyone present had actually used, worn smooth at the grip. Here's what I want us to see, Marilyn said near the end. Verse 5, the psalmist says he waits for the Lord, and his soul waits, and, listen, in his word, I put my hope. Not in the outcome. He doesn't say I wait for the Lord because I'm confident it'll all shake out the way I've sketched it. Watchmen don't get to design the morning, ladies. They get to know whose it is. You put your hope in the promise keeper, and then, this is the whole psalm, you stay at your post and let him keep them his way. And if you left your post, The voice was Annie's. She had not planned to speak. The question walked out of her on its own, and the table went gently, attentively still. Hypothetically, if a watchman left her post years ago, does she get to... The sentence looked for a safe ending and didn't find one, so Annie set it down, as is, in front of everybody. Is there still a morning for the watch you didn't keep? The percolator ticked. Mrs. Vogel's needle stopped. Marilyn looked at Annie down her reading glasses for a long moment, with the tenderness of a woman declining to open a gift in public. That, she said, is the best question anyone has asked at this table in 30 years, and it deserves better than the last 4 minutes of study. Ladies, Renata's son, the Hendrickson Girls' College funds, and Gus Lund's hip. Let's pray. And after the amen, while the fellowship hall emptied and Dana drove off, wearing the expression of a sister-in-law, heroically asking nothing, Marilyn touched Annie's arm. It's Tuesday, she said. I bake on Tuesdays. Come home with me. The Sorensen Parsonage kitchen had yellow curtains, a 50-year-old table with a lifetime of Bible studies soaked into the wood, and a pan of cardamom rolls whose smell alone constituted pastoral care. Marilyn poured coffee, sat down across from Annie, took off the reading glasses, and said, "All right, dear heart, the true version. Start where it starts." It took an hour. Annie told all of it. April, the arithmetic, the parking lot, the handshake, the letter, the 11 readings, the answer she never sent, the summer just past, the dock at Ephraim, the word mostly, the rained-out Thursday, the whole excavation, the door closing softly. I can't stand at a post office box at 50. Marilyn listened the whole way through with her hands around her cup, asking nothing, flinching nowhere, and when Annie finally ran out of story and sat there wrung out over cold coffee, the pastor's wife was quiet for a while. "Thank you," Marilyn said at last. 22 years is a long time to carry a box you never open. She refilled both cups, taking her time, and Annie understood the timing was itself a kindness, room to breathe before whatever came next. Now, I'm going to tell you what I see, and you may stop me when I'm wrong, and I won't be wrong. Okay, Annie said, unsteady. First, you have spent 22 years believing your sin was breaking that engagement, and so you've never actually repented, because half of you still thinks the arithmetic was right. And here's the hard truth, Annie. The arithmetic may have been right. It may have been wrong. Nobody will ever know, because you ran the numbers alone on a decision God builds for two people and himself, and then you handed down the verdict and sealed the court. The breaking isn't the thing, dear heart. The alone is the thing. The silence is the thing. You've finally seen that. I watched it arrive at my study this morning, so now we can talk honestly. Second. Marilyn turned her cup a slow quarter turn. You asked whether there's a morning for the watch you didn't keep, and I want to answer you from Joel, because it's the only place I know that answers it straight. You remember the locusts? Vaguely. Plague. Somewhere near the Minor Prophet's gift shop. Joel, chapter 2. Marilyn didn't reach for the Bible. She had it the way she had recipes. The locusts have eaten years, Annie. Not a crop, years. The field stripped to sticks, and it's the people's own unfaithfulness that let it happen. That's the sharp part. And into that ruin, God says, I will restore to you the years the locust has eaten. And then he goes further. You'll eat plenty and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord who dealt wondrously with you. And my people will never again be put to shame. She let the word stand in the yellow kitchen. Never again be put to shame, to people whose famine was their own fault. That's the God you left your post on, dear heart. He restores eaten years. It is very nearly his signature move. Annie's eyes had spilled over somewhere in the middle of it. Then, Erik? Ah, Marilyn held up one finger, gentle and absolutely immovable, and this was why Annie had come to this table and no other on the peninsula. Now, the part you won't like. Restoration is not repetition. Read the promise again. God says, I'll restore the years. He does not say, I'll return the crop. The locusts ate a 2004 harvest, Annie. That harvest is gone. Whatever God grows in that field now will be a new thing, in this year's weather, for the woman and the man who exist now. It will not taste like what you lost. And if you go into that orchard demanding the old vintage, you will trample the new planting flat. Restored years might mean Erik Lund. I'd be lying if I said I haven't wondered about God's sense of humor, watching that truck go by. But it might mean a restored Annie, full stop. A woman finally off the night watch she assigned herself, free, at peace, satisfied, whether or not that particular man ever. She caught herself wry. Whether or not that man ever comes back through the museum glass. You don't get to pick which restoration it is. That's his to design. Your job is exactly one thing. Get quiet, Annie said. You're going to say, get quiet. I'm going to say, get quiet. Marilyn smiled and pushed the pan of cardamom rolls across the table. You've run the restaurant of your own soul for 22 years, dear heart. Every worry seated, every fear fed, everything managed. Fire at 7 sharp. Close it for the season. Stop drafting the letter in your head. Stop running the new arithmetic. I can see you doing it right now at my table. Repent of the silence. That's between you and the Lord, and it's overdue. And then wait for him, more than watchmen for the morning, with your hope in his word and not in a green truck. He knows the address. He's had it for 22 years. Annie drove home the long way, down the shore through Ephraim, past Anderson Dock with its painted names, and that night, at her kitchen table on Cottage Row, she did the overdue thing at last. No arguments, no arithmetic. Just a 44-year-old woman confessing a 22-year-old silence to the God who had witnessed the whole watch. It did not feel like sunrise. Marilyn had warned her it might not. It felt like the moment the boil-over settles, the roar collapsing all at once into stillness, the dangerous oils burned away, the fish, against all appearances, done perfectly. Your calendar, Lord, she prayed, wrung clean. Your field. Your crop. I'll keep the watch. Out on the point, the lighthouse turned. Somewhere north of town, she knew, a man was standing at the end of his south rows in the dark. She did not drive there. She kept the watch. Morning, when it came, was Wednesday, and smelled like rain gone and cherries coming, and Annie Bergstrom got up and went to work. Chapter 8. In Quietness and Trust. The third week of August, the Peninsula got 2 pieces of news, and only one of them was true. The true one came Sunday night. Gus Lund had been taken from the rehab center in Sister Bay to the hospital in Sturgeon Bay with what the church prayer chain called a cardiac event, which is the phrase people use when they're trying to hold a door shut with vocabulary. By Monday, he was stable, ornery, demanding his own bathrobe kind of stable. But everyone who'd done this with a father or a husband of their own heard the sound underneath, the sound of a strong old man's calendar, quietly shortening. The false one arrived Tuesday, through the usual channels, wearing the usual disguise of certainty. Renata told it to Dana in the market, between the sweet corn and the register. She'd been stocking shelves Monday when Erik Lund stood in the cereal aisle on his phone for 10 entire minutes. Some orchard cooperative back in Michigan from the sound of it, and Renata had heard, with her own ears, the words generous offer, and Leif would have his friends back, and this was the part that traveled. Nothing has to be decided until after harvest. By Wednesday, it had been through 11 kitchens and a quilting circle, and the version that reached Annie, relayed by Dana in the restaurant office, reluctantly in the tone of a woman handing over something sharp, had shed every hedge and grown a conclusion. The co-op made Erik an offer on the orchard. He's selling after harvest. They're going back to Michigan. And there it was. Annie said something normal. She must have, because Dana went back to the reservation book instead of calling a doctor. But inside her chest, a control room she had decommissioned only 3 weeks earlier came back online all at once, every screen lighting up, every alarm from April of 2004 sounding in perfect working order after 22 years of maintenance. There it is. You knew. Contract's up the last Friday of August anyway. He told you himself. For now, maybe for good. Still working that out. He stood in your kitchen and said he can't do it again. And a man like that doesn't sit around waiting to get hurt. He makes an orderly plan. And the plan is Michigan. And you are a supplier relationship with 3 deliveries left on the calendar. See the wave coming. Seal the hatches. Cut the line. Thursday night at the staff meal, Leif put down his fork. Okay. Did somebody die? He said. You've gone all... He made a gesture encompassing her, the counter, the atmosphere. Polite. You're doing the thing my dad does. He gets quieter and more correct, and meanwhile, he's alphabetizing a shed at midnight. He picked the fork back up, 16 and devastating, and completely unaware of it. You guys are so weird, you know that? Whatever it is, just say it. That's literally what Mom always... And the sentence hit the place where his mother lived now, and stopped. And he ate his pie in silence, and Annie touched his shoulder once on her way to the walk-in, because there was nothing sayable to say. She was cordial at Friday's delivery. Cordial the way January is cordial. Erik, gray-faced with hospital hours, running on vending machine coffee, noticed. She watched him notice. She watched him attribute it wearily to the closed door being closed, and carry his clipboard back to the truck with the caution of a man who figured he had no standing left to ask. The museum glass had gone to ice, and she'd done it in 11 minutes, and she hated herself in the efficient, well-organized way she hated herself whenever the old machinery ran this smoothly. That night, she sat at her kitchen table on Cottage Row with the laptop open and wrote the email. It came out smooth as a lullaby. It had learned things in 22 years. The 2004 version had been delivered in the rain with her voice shaking, and this one had margins. Dear Erik, with the season winding down and the transition at the orchard still unsettled, we've been advised to review supply arrangements for next summer. Larson Orchards has capacity, and given the uncertainty around the operation's future, we feel it's prudent. As if there were a committee, as if Carl and Dana were standing behind her instead of asleep across town, as if anyone on Earth had advised her of anything except the control room at 4-alarm volume. The cursor blinked at the end of prudent. One more sentence, a signature, and by morning the hatches would be sealed. Whatever Erik Lund decided about Michigan, it would find nothing here to hit. She would be, the old word arrived right on schedule, polished from decades of service, responsible. Her finger was on the trackpad, hovering over send, when her eyes snagged on the corner of the screen. 12:41 a.m. A woman drafting a letter at midnight said a voice in her that sounded like Marilyn and also like the psalm, and also, faintly, like her mother, is not keeping the watch. She's deserting it. Annie sat back. She didn't send it. She didn't delete it either. She closed the laptop on it, the way you close a drawer on a thing you're not done with, and went to bed and slept the way you sleep on top of a loaded drawer, which is to say, barely. Her reading plan, the one-year kind, the one she'd restarted in July with Marilyn's blunt endorsement, behind schedule is a myth, dear heart. It's the Bible, not a train. Had her in Isaiah that week. Saturday morning, 5:40, coffee going gray in the window light, she opened to chapter 30 and walked straight into an ambush. The chapter was God talking to people making backup plans. That was the whole scene. His people, scared of what was coming, hustling down the road to Egypt to buy safety from Pharaoh. Treaties, fast horses, exits, arrangements. And God standing in the middle of the road, saying, in effect, "You never asked me." And then the verse. Annie had read it before. It was the kind of verse that ends up on driftwood in gift shops, and she had read it the gift shop way, right up until 5:41 that morning, when it opened like a trapdoor. In returning and rest, you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength, and you would have none of it. She read the last line 4 times. And you would have none of it. You said no. You said... She looked down the page, and there it was. Verbatim, the whole strategy. We will flee on horses. We will ride away fast. And the Lord's answer. Dry as Carl. Fine. Then everything that chases you will be faster. Annie set her coffee down with extreme care because her hands weren't reliable. There she was. Not in the promise, in the indictment. 22 years of fast horses. A woman famous the length of the Peninsula for staying put. Never left, never wanted to, her whole life inside one postcard. And the scripture had her cold. She had spent 2 decades in full gallop, fleeing every wave before it broke. The engagement, the letter she read 11 times and outran, and now a half-cent email folded in a laptop like a saddled horse in the yard. Because a rumor, she made herself say it, Renata's 10 minutes of serial aisle audio, garbled through half the town, had blown a little Egyptian dust down the road. In returning and rest, you shall be saved. Returning. Not to Erik, she saw the distinction arrive with the coffee-clear precision of 5 a.m. Returning to God, the way you return to a post. Rest, quietness, trust. Every single one of them, a thing you could not do at a gallop. The verse wasn't promising her the orchard would stay. It wasn't promising her anything about Erik Lund at all. It was telling her where her strength would come from on the day she finally stopped manufacturing her own. And it had been sitting in Isaiah for 2,700 years, waiting for her to stop writing past it. She opened the laptop. The email sat there in its draft folder, smooth and margined and prudent, the best-built seawall of her career. Lord, she prayed, hand on the keys, and it came out half laugh, half breaking. I don't know what he's deciding. You do. I can't make him stay, and I can't make morning come, and I have spent my whole life pretending those were jobs you'd assigned me. Her thumb found the trackpad, in quietness, in trust. All right, you keep him wherever he goes. I'll keep the watch. She deleted the draft. Not the drawer-closed kind of delete. The real one, empty the trash, no retrieval. Her seawall going down the way the boil-over goes, all at once, burning off everything the fish didn't need. Then, Annie Bergstrom did possibly the hardest thing she had ever done. Harder than April, because April at least had the mercy of motion. She went to work and prepped the potatoes and lit the fire at 7 and did not find out. Didn't call Renata for the raw audio. Didn't pump Leif at the staff meal, though the boy was sitting right there, 9 words an hour, a direct line into the farmhouse. Didn't drive up the county road with a casserole and reconnaissance objectives, the Peninsula's oldest trick. The not knowing sat in her chest at a rolling boil all weekend, and she stood at her post inside it, hour by hour, and let it boil, and did not ride. Sunday at Bayside, Pastor Dale preached on the Good Shepherd, and Annie heard maybe a third of it, and God, she suspected, counted her attendance anyway, the way you count the sheep that shows up shaking. The back pew held one tall teenager, alone, who slouched over afterward to report that his dad was at the hospital with Gus, and that the peaches Mrs. Vogel kept leaving on their porch were, quote, actually fire, and then loped out. And Annie watched him go, with her heart going sideways, because if the rumor was true, she was going to lose that kid too, and she hadn't budgeted for that at all. Monday evening, the restaurant dark, her phone rang. "Erik Lund," said the screen. Annie stood in her kitchen on Cottage Row and looked at it through 2 full rings. 3, while every horse in the stable stamped and tossed. Let it go to voicemail. Hear it cold, prepare a response, seal the... In quietness, she said to the stable, out loud, alone in her kitchen, and in trust. She answered. Chapter 9. The Orchard at First Light. Annie. Erik's voice came down the line rough as gravel, and behind it she could hear a hallway. Carts, intercom, the acoustics of linoleum. "I'm sorry to call. I know things are..." He declined to name what things were. "I'm at Sturgeon Bay. He's all right. He's stable. But he's been after me since supper, and he doesn't quit. You know how he..." A tired breath that was almost a laugh. "Gus is asking for you. By name. Tonight, if you'd come. I'd count it a kindness." She was in the car in 11 minutes, which, she reflected somewhere south of Egg Harbor, was the first time all summer that number had been on her side. She found Gus Lund propped up in a hospital bed, looking like a felled oak that intended to argue about it. Smaller than the man who had run ladders for 60 years, wired to machines he clearly regarded as vendors who had overcharged him, and still, underneath the gray, entirely Gus. Erik rose from the bedside chair when she came in. Their eyes met for the length of one held breath, everything from the rained-out Thursday, standing in the room with them. Then he touched his uncle's shoulder, said, "I'll go find the coffee machine," and left them, because he was, and had always been, that kind of man. "There she is." Gus's voice had lost weight, but not authority. "The Bergstrom girl. Sit." She sat. He looked her over with the frank assessment of a man pricing fruit. "They tell me my heart's wore out," he said without ceremony. "I told them I'd get a second opinion from the Lord, and the chaplain laughed, so at least somebody in this building has theology." He plucked at the blanket, and then he came to it, because Gus Lund had never in his life circled a field he could cut across. "I'm going to tell you 2 things, and you're going to let me, because I've got a bad heart and a full bathrobe of opinions, and you were always my favorite customer. First thing, that contract of ours ends the last Friday of August. 63 years. Lund fruit in Bergstrom pie. My dad shook hands with your grandpa when Kennedy was president, right there in your parking lot, and neither of them ever signed a thing until the lawyers made them. So, whatever else happens." One knotted finger rose off the blanket. "You renew. You hear me? Some things on this peninsula are load-bearing." "I'll renew," Annie said around the ache in her throat. "I promise." "Good." The finger came down. The old eyes, when they found hers again, had gone from commerce to something else entirely, and his voice dropped to match it. "Second thing, I watched my nephew grow up in those rows, and I've watched him a whole summer now, back in them. And I'm going to tell you what I know that neither of you knows I know, which at my age is most things." He let the machines chirp a moment. 22 years ago, that boy left here with a hole in him, and he built a whole beautiful life around the hole, which is what the sturdy ones do. And you stayed here and built yours the same way. 2 good lives, Annie. 2 holes. I used to watch you at that fire, telling your jokes, and think, there's the other one. He said it without accusation, an old man reporting weather. Now, I don't know what's broke between you 2 this time, and I don't want to know. I'm on a heart monitor, but I know this. One of you has to go first, and in 60 years of watching people, it's never the stubborn one. And the trouble with you 2 is you're both the stubborn one. He settled back into the pillows, spent and satisfied. A man who had gotten his crop in. So, go first, girl. You're younger than me and faster than him. And send my nephew back in here. He hides bad coffee slower than any man I ever met." In the hallway, passing Erik, Annie stopped. Museum glass everywhere, and no time and no privacy to break it, so she put her hand once, briefly, on his forearm. "Tomorrow," she said. "Don't load the truck at 6. I'll come to you." Whatever he saw in her face, he didn't ask. "All right," Erik said, and went into his uncle, and Annie drove the dark 40 minutes home with her heart hammering and did not rehearse one single word, which was, for her, a miracle approximately the size of the peninsula. First light on the orchard came up silver. Mist lay in the mowed lanes between the rows the way it does in August when the nights turn, and the last late fruit hung dark and heavy in it, and green bay showed through the downslope trees in pewter streaks. Annie came up the gravel lane at 5:40 with 2 thermoses of coffee and 22 years of unanswered mail on the passenger seat, and found Erik standing at the end of the south rows, right where his son said he stood, with his hands in his jacket pockets, waiting for her in the mist like something the orchard had grown. She walked up the lane and stood in front of him and went first. "You asked me for one word, 22 years ago," she said. "I owed you more than one, so I'm here to pay the whole bill, and I need you to let me get through it." He went still, and she got through it. All of it in the gray-silver light, with the mist bearing witness. The fear first. "I told you it was arithmetic, Erik, and I told myself it was responsibility, and it was fear. I was 22, and my father almost died, and the whole world came loose, and the one thing I could control was how much it could still hurt me. So I decided you'd grow to resent me. I decided it like a fact, because if you were going to become that man someday, I didn't have to be terrified of losing you anymore. I convicted you of a bitterness you never showed one sign of, in a trial you weren't invited to, and I have spent every year since calling that verdict responsible." Her voice cracked and she let it, which was new. "I'm not sorry I stayed for my family. I'd stay again. I am sorry, I will be sorry all my life, that I decided who you were instead of asking. You deserved the arithmetic. You deserved we. And then October came, and you mailed me a door with the key in it, and I read it 11 times and answered with silence, because answering meant admitting I'd been wrong, and my pride would rather break both our lives than be wrong." She held out the envelope, soft-cornered, older than his son's. "I couldn't throw it away, and I couldn't open it again. I've kept your letter like a stone in a box all this time, Erik. I'm done standing watch over a stone. This is me, saying the word, 22 years late, with interest. I was wrong. Forgive me." The mist moved in the lanes. Erik looked at the envelope in her hand for a long time, and when he looked up, his eyes were wet, and what he said was not any of the things she had braced for. "Karen knew about you." Annie's breath went out of her. "I told her before I proposed. Everything. The whole April. She said any man who'd been left 3 weeks before a wedding was owed one honest accounting of it, and then she married me anyway, because she had courage like other people have a pulse." He took the envelope gently and turned it over in his weathered hands. "And every year, I found this out by accident, years in. Every year around April, Karen prayed for you, by name. The Bergstrom girl. I asked her why once, and she said—" His voice caught, and he steadied it against the same discipline Annie used, and she recognized the technique like a family resemblance. She said, "Because whatever she's telling everyone, Erik, a woman who does that to herself isn't fine." He let that stand between them in the mist. "So you should know the accounting's more tangled than you think. You broke something, Annie, and God built my whole life in the hole it left. Karen, my boys. I can't wish April undone without wishing them undone, and I won't. Not for anything. That's the strange mercy nobody tells you about. He looked down at the envelope. As for this, I forgave the girl in the parking lot a long time ago. Karen extracted it out of me like a splinter, the second winter of the diagnosis. She said bitterness is a crop you eat alone, and she wasn't leaving me planted in it. What I never got to do was tell you. I've had the forgiveness sitting in cold storage for years, Annie. Nobody came for it. He handed the envelope back to her, folding her fingers around it with both of his. Keep it or burn it. It already did its work. It's the reason I knew, at 50, that I still write letters instead of getting on ferries. That's my side of the bill, since we're settling accounts. One letter, 22 years ago, and then I called my pride patience and married my hurt to my dignity, and never once got on the boat. You sealed the court, but I let the verdict stand. Two stubborn people. My uncle's been saying it for months. Your uncle, Annie said unsteadily, gave me my orders last night. He gave me mine in July. Almost a laugh, wet and low. Then he reached into his jacket, and what he brought out stopped her heart entirely. A small Bible, navy cover gone soft at the spine, and she knew whose before he said it. Karen's. I read it that first winter until the binding quit. There's a verse she underlined twice, Philippians near the end, where Paul says the one thing he does is this. Forgetting what lies behind and straining toward what lies ahead, he presses on toward the prize God's called him to. Karen wrote one word in the margin. He opened it to the ribbon and turned it so Annie could see the schoolteacher hand, still confident, still grading, daily. Forgetting doesn't mean the past didn't happen, Erik said. She made sure I understood that. It means you stop feeding it. You take your hands off the plow of it, daily, because it doesn't stay quit. He closed the Bible with the care of a man closing a door he could open again any time, and looked at Annie in the strengthening light, and the mist was starting to burn gold at the top of the rose. So, here's where I am, Annie Bergstrom, at first light, in my uncle's orchard. The co-op called in July. I turned them down 2 weeks ago. They called back Monday, trying to sweeten it. I was in the market at the time, so I'd guess that's where the story started, and I told them what I'd already told them. Before the rumor, whatever version of it reached you. I saw it land that Friday. I just didn't know yet what had hit you. Gus's name stays on the barn. Leif's got a fire and a woodpile and a boss he respects, though he'd die before saying it. I'm not going anywhere. He took one step closer, steady as morning. And I am not interested in the girl in the parking lot. That's the last thing I'll say about her. I want to know the woman who ran a kitchen for 22 years and kept a whole town fed and stood up a 16-year-old's broken summer without being asked. I'd like to court her, slowly at our age, in whatever season the Lord says it is. If she'll have me. The sun cleared the tree line east of the barn, and the mist went up off the lanes in gold smoke, and the whole south block lit at once, every dark cherry suddenly burning red, 10,000 small lanterns, the entire orchard doing in 1 minute what it had spent the whole summer learning. She'll have you, Annie said. He kissed her then, once, in the gold and the burning off mist, with Karen's Bible in one hand and her 22-year-old letter pressed between them, brief and certain and worth by Annie's private arithmetic every single day of the wait. Then he stepped back, honorably, grinning like the boy she'd known and the man she didn't yet, and picked up both thermoses. Come on, Erik said. Help me load the truck. You're late for your own delivery. Chapter 10. Last boil of the season. The last Friday of August came in gold, the way the Peninsula's best days do when summer is packing to leave. the light slanting lower over Green Bay, the maples up on the bluff carrying their first rumors of red, the harbor full of boats, making the most of what was left. By 6 o'clock, the lawn at Bergstrom's held the biggest crowd of the season, the final tourists of the year in their windbreakers, and threaded all through them in lawn chairs they'd brought themselves, most of the year-round population of Fish Creek, because word had gone around, through the usual channels, that tonight's boil was going to be worth attending, and for once, the grapevine had it exactly right. Gus Lund sat in the place of honor nearest the fire, released from Sturgeon Bay just 3 days prior, bundled in a plaid blanket against the evening despite his stated objections, with Mrs. Vogel stationed beside him in open defiance of his other stated objections. Marilyn and Pastor Dale had the next chairs down, and standing at the woodpile, wearing fireproof gloves that were still slightly too big for him, was Erik Lund, being watched by his brother. Anders had rolled in from East Lansing the night before with a duffel bag and his father's jaw, and had spent the day being shown the entire peninsula by a 16-year-old who, Annie noticed, had somewhere in the last month stopped saying here like a swear word. He showed me the orchard, the marina, some rock he likes, and your walk-in cooler, Anders reported, shaking Annie's hand with an ag student's grip. In that order. Also, he says he's throwing the kerosene tonight, which, respectfully, ma'am, I came 400 miles to see. Annie, said Annie. Annie? Anders agreed and grinned Erik's grin, 20 years younger, and went to stand where the view was good. She ran the boil the way she had run 1,000 of them, and completely unlike any of them. The kettle rolling, the story of Gustav and his $11, the salt joke landing for the last time of the year, and the whole time, the two differences, visible and invisible. The visible one was at the woodpile, where Carl was delivering the final instruction to his apprentice with the gravity of a man handing on the family sword. His entire speech, which Annie caught from the fire, was, "The trick is respecting it, also standing back." Leif nodded the way young men nod at Sinai, and the invisible difference was in the kitchen window behind the crowd, where she could see, moving calm through the steam, the man who had delivered this morning's cherries and stayed to cut the pies. "Folks," Annie called when the fish oils came up and the moment arrived. For 63 years, this boil has been finished by a Bergstrom. Tonight, we're doing something different, because this peninsula runs on its neighbors, and this summer we got some good ones back. She looked at the boy in the two big gloves. "Erik Lund, take us home." The lawn went quiet. Leif lifted the pail, glanced once at Carl, who moved not one muscle, which in Carl was a benediction, and threw. The fire took the kerosene and stood up, roaring, 10 feet of orange against the evening, and the kettle went over in a magnificent hissing crown, and the crowd came off their chairs, and above all of it, Annie heard two sounds she would keep. Gus Lund's cracked shout of, "Ha!" and from the kitchen doorway, over the applause, one low voice saying, "That's my son." They ate at long tables in the lowering evening light, tourists and town all mixed together, whitefish and potatoes and Mrs. Vogel's coleslaw that nobody had asked for and everybody finished. And when the pie went around, Lund fruit in Bergstrom crust, the last of the fresh crop, so red it looked lit from inside, Pastor Dale stood up at the head table at Gus's growled instruction and raised one hand over the leftovers, and the lawn quieted for the grace nobody had announced and everybody had somehow expected. "Lord," Dale said, easy as ever, "we're at the end of a season, so we'll keep the book short. You said through the prophet Joel that you restore the years the locusts eat, that your people will eat in plenty, and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord who dealt wondrously with them, and never be put to shame." Well, he let the evening speak a moment. The loaded tables, the harbor going rows behind the masts, the old man in the plaid blanket, the two families threaded down one bench. Look at the tables, Lord. We're eating the evidence. You make everything beautiful in its time. Not our time, yours. And yours is better. And every person at this boil has the receipts. The fruit is sweet in its season. So are your mercies. Deal wondrously with us through the winter, and bring us all back to this fire. Amen. Amen, said the lawn, tourists included, some of them surprised to hear it in their own voices. Then, Gus rapped his knuckles on the table and demanded witnesses. So it was done, right there, between the pie and the coffee, in front of God and the town, and a table of gulls waiting on the railing. Erik Lund and Annie Bergstrom shook hands on one more year of Lund fruit in Bergstrom pie. 63 years and counting, no lawyers, the same handshake their grandfathers had traded when Kennedy was president, while Gus supervised from his blanket like a bishop, and Dana took a picture that would hang by the register for the next 40 years. What the picture caught, and what the whole town saw perfectly well, was that the handshake went on considerably longer than commerce required. Load-bearing, Gus pronounced, satisfied, and had more pie against medical advice. The crowd thinned the way summer itself was thinning. Slowly, warmly, nobody quite willing to be first. The families drifted to their cars. Carl banked the fire. Anders and Leif were down on the dock, skipping stones with the intense sibling competitiveness of young men who had missed each other and would not be saying so, and their laughter came up off the water in the blue dusk. Erik found Annie at the end of the dock, past the last cleat, where the harbor opened out toward Chambers Island, and the sky was doing its final gold-to-rose business over the bay. For a while they stood and watched his sons and said nothing, and the silence was the good kind. The kind she'd learned this summer had been waiting for her all along. "I have something for you," Annie said. "It's 22 years late, so brace yourself." From her apron pocket, she brought out an envelope. Not the soft-cornered one, a new one, crisp, and on the front, in her steadiest kitchen-order handwriting, Erik Lund, Lund Orchards, Fish Creek, Wisconsin. Stamped. "I read your letter," she said. His whole body went still, the way it had in the mist. "Tuesday night, finally, all of it. You were 25 and you spelled definitely wrong twice, and it is the finest thing anyone has ever written me." Her voice was doing what it did now, cracking where it needed to, no discipline applied. "It deserved an answer. It's a little slow coming. The mail's terrible off the Peninsula. But I'm told the Postal Service delivers late letters all the time. It's never the letter's fault." Erik took the envelope, opened it with orchard rough care. Inside was a single card, and on the card, one word. Yes. He looked at it a long time. The water lapped at the pilings, and down the dock his son's laughter rang out over some disputed throw, and the first star was standing up over Chambers Island. "To be clear about the question," he said when his voice was working, "because I'm 47 and I've learned to close loops. This fall, I'd like to do it right. Sunday dinners, the harvest festivals up and down the peninsula. There's about 40 of them. I've been gone, you'll have to navigate. Pumpkins with my sons. Pew's a little crowded on the harbor side, but I'm told the bayside has room and bayside folks can be talked into moving." The joke wobbled. Underneath it, his eyes were as serious as first light. "I want to court you through the fall and the winter, Annie Bergstrom, at a courting pace, with the whole town watching, because they're going to watch anyway. And in the spring, when the blossoms come, I intend to ask you a better question, with better jewelry, and I am telling you the schedule in advance, because neither of us does well with surprises." He held up the card. "Does the yes cover the whole calendar?" The lighthouse out on the point began its night's work, the beams sweeping slow and patient over the darkening water, faithful as it had ever been, all those years she'd watched it alone. "It's a one-word answer," Annie said. "You'll notice it doesn't expire." He laughed, the low, sudden laugh, hers again, and took her hand, work rough and warm and certain, and they stood at the end of the dock in the last of the light while the stars came up over the bay. 2 people in the middle of their story after all, and nobody had to tell them. The following May, on a morning washed clean by night rain, the Lund orchard stood in full bloom. 80 acres of white, row after row after row, humming with bees, and so bright under the sun, it looked like the peninsula had been handed down fresh that morning. Cherry blossoms only last a week or so. The whole county knows to drop what it's doing and drive out to look. Annie Bergstrom stood mid-slope in the south rows, where the mist had burned gold in August, wearing flour on her sleeve from the morning's pies, and, on her left hand, a ring exactly 1 week old, because Erik Lund kept schedules and God kept seasons, and it turned out you could trust them both. The date was set for September, after the boils, after the harvest, at Bayside Community Church, 4th pew and back pew and every pew between, Pastor Dale presiding, Marilyn already managing the whole affair from a legal pad, Gus threatening, heart or no heart, to dance. She stood in the white rose with the petals coming down like the world's gentlest weather, and laughed out loud at nothing, at everything, and said it to the one who had kept the calendar all along, the way you'd say it across a kitchen, to someone you'd finally learned to trust with the timing of things. Sweet in its season, Lord. You were right about that. You were right about all of it.
I used to run ahead of you, out where the cold winds start, sealing every window against the storm, standing guard around my heart. I call it being careful, I call it holding on. But every spring you sent to me, I was already gone. And still you make everything beautiful in your time by your hand. Every good thing ripens slowly, held inside your plan. You give back the years I buried, you redeem my every wrong reason. Lord, you make it sweet, sweet in its season. More than watchmen wait for morning, my soul is waited, Lord. You counted all my sleepless nights, you kept your every word. In quietness you call me, in rest you make me strong. I could never make the morning come, it was yours all along. And still you make everything beautiful in your time by your hand. Every good thing ripens slowly, held inside your plan. You give back the The long years felt like rain, but you're the God of the second bloom. You plant the field again, not the life I lost, a new one, growing wild and true. The winter wasn't wasted, Lord, it was leaning into you. So I will trust the slow work of your time, of your hand. Every promise ripens surely, nothing falls outside your plan. You restore what the locusts have eaten. You redeem my every wrong reason. Lord, you made it sweet, sweet in its season. Everything beautiful in its time. Everything beautiful in your time. Sweet in its season.
Thank you for spending some time with us, listening, reflecting, and resting in God's endless love. If this story touched you, encouraged you, or brought a moment of peace, I'd be so grateful if you'd leave a like. It helps our uplifting stories reach more hearts. If you'd like to join us for more grace-filled tales, please subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Until we meet again in the next story, may you carry His grace with you, one gentle step at a time. Simply Grace Audio. Simple stories, endless grace.